Okay, draw the curtains tight. Check the locks if it makes you feel better, though I doubt terrestrial locks matter much to the things I'm talking about tonight. Forget haunted houses. Forget cursed objects for a moment. Let's talk about something closer. Something that waits for you in the dark, not under the bed, but behind your own eyes. There are shadows that cling to the edge of sleep, entities that feast on paralysis and terror. And sometimes, if you're unlucky, if you're noticed, they don't stay confined to your nightmares. They learn the way out. This isn't about bad dreams. This is about the night visitor who decides to overstay its welcome. It started for me. Let's call me Thomas. It helps anchor the memory. During a period of intense stress. Long hours at a job I was beginning to hate. Financial worries gnawing at the edges of my thoughts. The low-grade hum of anxiety that's become the background noise of modern life. Sleep was my escape, but it became shallow, restless. Then came the first episode. I woke, or thought I woke, in the dead of night. Pitch black room, the faint outline of the window barely visible, but I couldn't move. Not a muscle. Panic surged, cold and electric. My eyes darted around the room, straining in the darkness. I tried to call out, but only a choked gasp escaped. My chest felt incredibly heavy, as if a great weight was pressing down, crushing the air from my lungs. Classic sleep paralysis. I'd read about it before. Unsettling, but explainable. A misfire between brain and body during the REM cycle. But then I saw it, or rather, sensed it first. A deepening of the shadows in the corner of the room, near the old, heavy wardrobe I'd inherited from my grandfather. A patch of darkness that seemed wrong, too deep, too still. As my eyes adjusted, straining against the paralysis, the shadow seemed to coalesce, detaching itself from the ambient gloom. It was tall, impossibly thin, vaguely humanoid but distorted, like a reflection in warped glass. It had no discernible features, just a silhouette of profound blackness. Yet I felt, with utter certainty, that it was looking directly at me. The pressure on my chest intensified. The air grew colder, and a low, guttural humming seemed to vibrate not in the room, but inside my own skull. Terror, pure and primal, flooded me. I fought against the paralysis with every ounce of will, desperate to scream, to flee. And then, as suddenly as it began, I could move. I gasped, bolting upright, drenched in sweat, heart hammering. The room was empty. The shadows were just shadows. The silence was absolute. I told myself it was a hypnagogic hallucination. A common symptom of sleep paralysis. The figure, the pressure, the sounds. Textbook examples of the brain generating fear responses during the vulnerable state between sleep and wakefulness. I tried to rationalize it, dismiss it. But the feeling, the sheer malevolent presence I had sensed, lingered long after the physical paralysis faded. It felt ancient, predatory, and deeply personal. The episodes started happening more frequently, 2, 3 times a week, always the same pattern. Waking paralyzed. The crushing weight, the intense cold, and the figure emerging from the shadows near the wardrobe. It never moved closer, just stood there, a pillar of absolute darkness radiating malice. Each time, the terror felt fresh, undiluted. My waking hours became tinged with anxiety. I found myself glancing nervously at the wardrobe during the day, even though it was just a piece of heavy, dark wood. I started avoiding sleeping on my back based on some half-remembered article claiming it could trigger paralysis. I left a nightlight on, hoping to dispel the deep shadows it seemed to favor. It didn't help. If anything, the nightlight made it worse. Now, when the paralysis hit, I could see the corner more clearly, and the figure. It wasn't just a silhouette anymore. The low light seemed to give it a horrifying substance. It was still tall and skeletally thin, draped in what looked like ragged, decaying black cloth, but I could see hints of what lay beneath. Long, impossibly thin fingers, like bundles of dried twigs, extended from the ends of its unnaturally long arms. It had no discernible face, just a smooth, sunken area where features should be, yet I could feel its eyeless gaze fixed upon me. And sometimes, just sometimes, I thought I saw a brief, fleeting distortion in that sunken area, the momentary impression of a wide, lipless grin splitting the featureless void, filled with far too many needle-sharp teeth. The humming sound became clearer too, resolving into a low, guttural chant or whisper just below the threshold of comprehension, filled with sibilant sounds and clicking noises that scraped at my nerves. The pressure on my chest felt like bony fingers digging in, stealing my breath. Sleep was no longer an escape. It was a recurring appointment with my own personal nightmare, an entity that seemed to be growing stronger, more defined with each visit. Then came the night it broke its pattern. The paralysis gripped me. The cold descended. The figure materialized by the wardrobe, its non-face seeming to peel back in that horrifying, momentary grin. The humming filled my skull. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying for it to end, for the release of movement. I felt a sudden, icy touch on my bare arm, resting outside the covers. Not pressure, but distinct, skeletal fingers, impossibly cold, tracing a line from my wrist to my elbow. I gasped, eyes flying open. The figure was still standing by the wardrobe, its twig-like hand outstretched towards me, though it wasn't physically long enough to reach. Yet I had felt it, clear as day. The touch lingered, a burning cold against my skin. Then, just as the paralysis released its grip, and I scrambled upright, panting, I heard it. A dry, sibilant whisper, seeming to echo from the corner where the figure had stood, even though it was already gone. Soon, just that one word, hanging in the silent, empty room. It wasn't just a hallucination anymore. It had touched me. It had spoken, and it had promised something. The line between nightmare and reality had just become terrifyingly thin. That single word, soon, echoing in the wake of the phantom touch, changed everything. The comforting blanket of rationalization, sleep paralysis, hypnagogic hallucinations, shredded completely. This wasn't just my brain misfiring. It was an interaction. An entity, born of shadow and nightmare, had acknowledged me, touched me, made a promise. Sleep became a landscape of dread. Every time I closed my eyes, I braced for the inevitable paralysis, the crushing weight. The arrival of the figure I started calling the night hag, though it felt far older and more alien than any folklore creature. The phantom touches became more frequent during the episodes. Icy fingers brushing my cheek, a feeling like dry, brittle hair sweeping across my forehead. Once, the sensation of cold, sharp points pressing lightly against my throat, just shy of breaking the skin. The figure itself remained by the wardrobe, seemingly tethered to that specific corner, yet its reach, its influence, was clearly extending. The pressure on my chest often felt accompanied now by a faint, foul odor, dust, decay, and something vaguely metallic, like spoiled blood. The humming chant grew more complex, layers of whispers and clicks weaving together into something that felt disturbingly like language, albeit one never meant for human ears. The momentary flash of the needle-tooth grin became more common, a terrifying punctuation mark to its silent observation. My waking life deteriorated rapidly. I was perpetually exhausted, jumpy, irritable. Concentration at work became impossible. I avoided social interaction, retreating into my apartment, though home offered no comfort. The wardrobe became a focal point of my waking anxiety. I considered getting rid of it, chopping it up, burning it, but a deeper, colder fear held me back. What if the wardrobe wasn't the source, but merely an anchor? What if removing it wouldn't banish the entity, but simply untether it, allowing it to roam freely? The thought was paralyzing. I took to sleeping on the couch in the living room, hoping a change of location might break the cycle. It didn't. The first night on the couch, the paralysis hit harder than ever. The figure wasn't by the wardrobe in the bedroom. It materialized in the darkest corner of the living room, near the unlit fireplace. Its presence felt stronger here, less confined. The cold was intense, leaching warmth from the room. The pressure on my chest was suffocating, and this time, when its skeletal fingers reached out, the touch wasn't phantom. I felt needle-sharp points prick my arm, drawing blood. Small, dark droplets welled up on my skin, stark against the pallor induced by the cold and terror. When the paralysis finally broke, the figure vanished instantly, but the pinpricks on my arm remained, burning cold. The blood was real. It had crossed over. The barrier, whatever it was, had been breached. Desperation drove me to seek help, but what kind? Doctors offered sedatives, dismissive diagnoses of stress-induced nightmares. Therapists spoke of anxiety disorders, trauma responses. None of them truly grasped the reality of the experience, the feeling of a tangible, malevolent intelligence interacting with me. I researched folklore, demonology, fringe accounts of shadow people and incubi, finding chilling parallels, but no practical solutions, only warnings and tales of madness or death. Holy water, salt mines, religious icons. I tried them all, feeling foolish, but driven by sheer terror. They seemed to offer no protection. The entity regarded my feeble attempts with what felt like cold amusement, the needle-toothed grin flashing more frequently during its visits. One night, deep in research, bleary-eyed and fueled by caffeine, I stumbled upon an obscure online forum dedicated to shared experiences of persistent, aggressive sleep paralysis entities. Among the desperate accounts, one thread mentioned recurring figures associated with specific objects, particularly old mirrors or dark, heavy furniture. And then, a specific mention, inherited pieces, items belonging to relatives who suffered from night terrors or mental illness. My grandfather. The wardrobe had been his. He'd suffered from terrible nightmares in his later years, diagnosed as dementia-related agitation. He'd sometimes lash out at unseen things in his room, particularly near the wardrobe. Had he been seeing the same figure? Had it been attached to him? Had inheriting the wardrobe somehow transferred its attention to me? The thought sent a fresh wave of ice through my veins. This wasn't just my visitor. It was a legacy, an inherited curse. I dug through old family boxes, searching for anything related to my grandfather's final years. I found a small, leather-bound journal tucked away in a box of his personal effects. His handwriting, shaky with age, filled the pages. Mostly mundane observations, but then, towards the end, entries became fragmented, fearful. He wrote about the shadow man that came at night, the pressure on his chest, the cold, the feeling of being watched from the wardrobe. He described trying to fight it, feeling it grow stronger with his fear. Then a chilling entry. It whispers promises. Want something, a way out. Showed me the key. The entry ended abruptly. The next page was blank. He died a week later. A key, a way out for it. My blood ran cold. Was that its goal? Not just to torment, but to somehow use its victim, use the connection forged through terror, to escape its shadowed prison, to fully cross over. Was the wardrobe not just an anchor, but a doorway? And had my grandfather, in his fear and confusion, been shown how to open it? The journal offered no further clues. But now I knew. The entity wasn't just feeding on my fear. It had a purpose. It wanted out. And its promise, soon, took on a terrifying new meaning. Soon, it intended to find its key. And I had a horrifying suspicion that the key, somehow, was me. The revelation from my grandfather's journal shifted the terror from passive endurance to active dread. The night hag wasn't just feeding, it was working towards something. It wanted out, and I was somehow the key. The paralysis episodes took on a new, horrifying dimension. It wasn't just about surviving the fear anymore. It was about resisting whatever insidious process the entity was enacting. The touches became more probing, lingering longer, the icy point seeming to test the boundary between its realm and mine. The humming chant felt more directed, less like ambient noise, and more like an attempt at communication, or perhaps manipulation, seeking a weakness, a resonance within me. I became obsessed with the wardrobe. During the day, I'd examine every inch of the heavy, dark wood. Intricate carvings depicted scenes I hadn't truly noticed before, distorted faces hidden in floral motifs, serpent-like creatures coiled around the handles, scenes of figures seemingly trapped or tormented within the grain. Were these just stylistic flourishes, or representations of the entity or its previous victims? I searched for hidden compartments, loose panels, anything that might suggest a physical key or mechanism my grandfather might have discovered. I found nothing but solid, ancient wood, unnaturally cold to the touch even in the warmth of the day. Yet, standing near it, I felt the same oppressive presence I experienced during the paralysis, fainter, but undeniably there. It was a conduit, a doorway. My waking hours were consumed by a desperate search for countermeasures. If religious symbols didn't work, what would? I delved deeper into obscure occult texts, folklore surrounding threshold spirits and parasitic entities. Theories abounded: iron, running water, specific herbs, complex banishing rituals. Most seemed wildly impractical or required knowledge I didn't possess. One recurring theme, however, caught my attention: the idea that these entities thrive on focused attention and fear, but might be repelled or weakened by strong, focused will, by denying them the emotional sustenance they crave, by refusing to engage. Easier said than done when paralyzed and facing a manifestation of pure terror. I started practicing lucid dreaming techniques, mindfulness exercises, anything to gain some measure of control over my mental state during the terrifying transition between sleep and wakefulness. I focused on cultivating anger instead of fear, a defiant rage against this thing that had tormented my grandfather and now sought to use me. I filled my waking thoughts with protective imagery, mental shields, affirmations of my own space and sovereignty. It felt like arming myself with thoughts and prayers against a physical assault, hopelessly inadequate, yet it was all I had. The next few paralysis episodes were battles of will fought on a terrifyingly intimate battlefield. As the familiar cold descended and the figure materialized, I focused every ounce of mental energy on projecting defiance. You are not welcome here. This is my space. You have no power over me. I visualized a shield of light pushing back against the crushing pressure. I met its eyeless gaze, or where its gaze should be, with internal fury instead of terror. It seemed surprised. The humming faltered. The needle-toothed grin didn't appear. The probing touches ceased. The entity just stood there, radiating a palpable wave of cold, frustrated malice. It felt like I had momentarily jammed its psychic lockpicks. The paralysis still held me fast. The terror was still immense, but the feeling of violation lessened slightly. I wasn't just a victim. I was resisting. But the entity adapted. If direct terror wasn't yielding the desired key, it shifted tactics. The next time, instead of the usual terrifying visage, the figure appeared subtly different. Less menacing, almost sorrowful. The humming became a low, mournful sound, like the ghost melody from the music box story. The pressure on my chest felt less like crushing weight and more like a heavy embrace. Whispers started, not the guttural chant, but soft, pleading voices seemingly coming from within the figure's darkness. Voices of children crying for help. Voices of women weeping in despair. My grandfather's voice, thin and reedy, begging me to let him out, promising peace if I just opened the door. It played on sympathy, on guilt, on familial obligation. It sought to trick me into lowering my mental shields, into willingly offering the key it craved. It was harder to resist this. The raw terror was almost preferable to the insidious emotional manipulation. The feigned sorrow felt more violating than the open malice. But my grandfather's journal echoed in my mind. It whispers promises. This was the same tactic. I held firm, focusing on my anger, recognizing the deception. Lies. You are not them. Get out. The figure recoiled slightly, the sorrowful facade momentarily flickering, revealing the cold fury beneath before dissolving back into the shadows as the paralysis released me. I knew I couldn't keep this up indefinitely. Each encounter left me drained, psychically scarred. It was learning, adapting. Sooner or later, my defenses would slip, or it would find a new approach. I couldn't just keep resisting, I had to do something decisive. Looking at the looming wardrobe, the conduit, the door, I made a terrifying decision. I couldn't destroy it for fear of unleashing the entity entirely. I couldn't seal it magically, but maybe I could enter the nightmare willingly. Use the paralysis, the connection point, to confront it on its own turf, or at least within the threshold it inhabited via the wardrobe. Maybe the key wasn't just about letting it out, but also about me getting in. It was an insane gamble, potentially leading to madness or psychic annihilation. But passively waiting for it to succeed felt like a slower, more certain damnation. Tonight, I wouldn't fight the paralysis. I would invite it. I would face the figure, not with defiance, but with intention. I would try to follow the connection back to its source. I would become the key, but perhaps not in the way the night hag intended. I would try to lock the door from the other side,